Today we're going to be talking about photosynthesis and cellular respiration. Energy is needed by all living organisms, including plants, animals, and marine organisms as well. But where does this come from? The sun. The sun provides the energy that helps plants make food for other organisms. There are two types of organisms, autotrophs and heterotrophs. Autotrophs make their own food, like plants. Heterotrophs can't, so they have to eat autotrophs to gain energy. So the sun provides the light energy that is used by plants to make food, which are then eaten by other animals through a series of chains. This is basically the transfer of energy. There are two main processes of energy, photosynthesis and cellular respiration. The energy molecule involved in this is ATP. We'll talk more about this later. Photosynthesis is basically the production of glucose in plant cells and only occurs in autotrophs. The chemical formula for photosynthesis is CO2 plus H2O plus light equals glucose and oxygen as a waste. But where does everything come from and go? Before we go into details, let's talk about redox reactions. They're also called oxidation-reduction reactions. They are the transfer of electrons. Redox reactions release energy when electrons move closer to more electronegative atoms. It's most important information. Both photosynthesis and cellular respiration allow the transfer of electrons, thus providing us with energy ATP. Oxidation is when electrons are lost, while reduction is when electrons are gained. So in this equation here, X loses an electron while Y gains an electron. In the chemical equation, Na plus Cl equals Na plus chlorine minus, the reducing agent, otherwise known as the electron donor, is Na, while oxidizing agent, or the electron acceptor, is Cl. Photosynthesis occurs in the chloroplasts of plant cells. There are two main processes, light-dependent reactions and the Calvin cycle. Light-dependent reactions occurs in the thylakoids, while the Calvin cycle occurs in the stroma. The chlorophyll in the thylakoid membranes absorbs sunlight in a set quantity known as photons. Photons are just a discrete amount of particles that are not tangible. When molecules absorb photons, the electrons in its orbits move from a ground state to an excited state. Chlorophyll is organized into photosystems. There are photosystem 1 and 2 in a typical chloroplast. It contains different types of pigments such as A, B, and carotenoids. There's also a reaction center and a primary electron acceptor. But how do all these components play out? The light reactions involve water, light, and oxygen. Water and light enter the thylakoids and oxygen leaves as a waste. Two ways light reactions occurs, non-cyclic and cyclic. Non-cyclic involves both photosystems 1 and 2. The photon absorbed by the photosystem hops along until reaching the reaction center P680. This causes the electron to jump up and get carried by the primary acceptor. Water is split into hydrogen ions, oxygen, and electrons. This electron replaces the reaction center, and oxygen leaves as a waste. The primary acceptor travels along the first electron transfer chain through a series of proteins. The energy through the exergonic process creates ATP, also known as non-cyclic photophosphorylation. After reaching photosystem 1, the same thing occurs. Light causes the electron to be carried by the primary acceptor. Water is split, and this electron replaces reaction center, and oxygen leaves as a waste. The primary acceptor travels along a second transport chain, ending in RDP reductase, which creates the electron carrier NADPH. This is a long, complicated process, but light reactions can occur in a simple way through cyclic electron flow. During the cyclic electron flow, it is shorter, uses only photosystem 1, doesn't produce oxygen nor NADPH, but only produces ATP. The cell uses a cyclic motion when it doesn't have enough ATP and doesn't need to produce any DPH. So, in cyclic, only photosystem 1 is used. Light shines, causing the electron to be trapped by the primary acceptor. Instead of traveling along a second transport chain, it travels along a circular chain of proteins. This produces ATP through an exergonic process and is known as cyclic photophosphorylation. And only photosystem 1 is used. Remember, it doesn't produce oxygen or any DPH. The ATP generated from the electron flow is used to make ATP through a process called chemiosmosis. What is chemiosmosis? It is the process of creating ATP by establishing a proton gradient along the thylakoid membrane. Sounds a handful? Let's simplify. After splitting water, the hydrogen ions remain in the stroma, and they're being pumped back into the thylakoid space through the energy created by the electron flow. However, there is an enzyme called ATP synthase in the membrane that produces ATP while the hydrogen ions are being diffused back into the stroma. That is how ATP is created. Next up is the Calvin cycle. CO2 and glucose are involved in this stage. Calvin cycle occurs in the stroma. The ATP and NADPH produced by light reactions is used in the Calvin cycle to produce glucose. There are 3 steps: carbon fixation, reduction, regeneration of CO2 acceptor. Remember, the Calvin cycle occurs in the stroma, so it doesn't need light. The first step is carbon fixation. Each CO2 molecule that enters gets incorporated into a 5-carbon sugar called RUBP by ribosco, an enzyme. The end product, phosphoglycerate, gets reduced through various molecules into finally something called glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate, otherwise known as G3P. One of these molecules is left as glucose. In this process, 6 ATP and 6 NADPH is used. That's reduction. The remaining G3P gets rearranged into RUBP, ready for the next CO2. To sum up, photosynthesis is divided into light reactions and the Calvin cycle. Light and water enter the thylakoids and oxygen leaves as a waste. In the Calvin cycle, CO2 enters and glucose leaves as a product. In this process, light reactions produce ATP and NADPH, while Calvin cycle reduces them to ADP and NADP+. Cellular respiration is just as important as photosynthesis. All organisms need to obtain energy, whether they're plants or animals. We all need energy. Photosynthesis only occurs in plants, while cellular respiration occurs in all organisms. The chemical formula is the opposite of photosynthesis. Glucose plus oxygen equals water, carbon dioxide, and energy, the thing we need. There are 4 steps to cellular respiration: glycolysis, production of acetyl-CoA, Krebs cycle, and etc. Where does it occur? In the mitochondria. The first step is glycolysis. It means the splitting of sugar and occurs in the cytosol. This can occur without oxygen. There are 2 stages: energy investment and energy payoff, where ATP is used and ATP is gained. What starts off as glucose is catalyzed by various enzymes and finally ends up as 2 pyruvates. In this process, 2 ATP is reduced and 2 ATP is gained. Another molecule gained is NADH, which is an electron carrier. This is different from NADPH, which is used in photosynthesis. A total gain is 2 pyruvates, 2 ATP, and 2 NADH. The next step is production of acetyl-CoA. When the pyruvate travels to the mitochondria, a coenzyme catalyzes pyruvate into acetyl-CoA. Through this process, CO2 is released as waste and 2 NADH is gained. Don't worry, we're almost there. The Krebs cycle is the next step, and it occurs in the mitochondrial matrix. The acetyl-CoA combines with oxaloacetate and produces citrate. These series of compounds go through various catalyzations and produce oxaloacetate as a result, similar to the Calvin cycle. ATP is produced through substrate-level phosphorylation, which produces less energy than oxidative phosphorylation. NADH is produced at 3 different locations along the cycle, and another electron carrier that's produced is FADH2. This holds less energy than NADH. A total net gain of 6 NADH, 2 ATPs, and 2 FADH are produced in Krebs cycle. CO2 is released as waste. The final step of cellular respiration is electron transport chain and produces the most amount of energy in cellular respiration. NADH and FADH2 are the 2 most important electron carriers that are involved. They deliver the electrons through a series of chains, finally ending in oxygen. NADH attaches earlier than FADH2 because it contains more energy and electrons. This flow of electrons creates the ATP energy that is used for chemiosmosis. Chemiosmosis in cellular respiration is the same as photosynthesis in thylakoid membrane. Hydrogen ion flow from the mitochondrial matrix to the intermembrane space creates a proton gradient or proton motive force that allows ATP synthase to produce ATP. This produces the most amount of ATP in cellular respiration. Once NADH and FADH attach themselves to the electron transport chain, this creates a flow of energy, causing hydrogen ions to flow from the mitochondrial matrix into the intermembrane space. Once these hydrogen ions come back inside the mitochondrial matrix, ATP synthase produces ATP. This creates about 34 ATP. Water is released as a waste, and this ATP is produced by oxidative phosphorylation, which creates the most amount of energy. To sum this up, what enters as glucose and oxygen leaves as water, carbon dioxide, and energy. How does this occur? Well, 4 stages. Glycolysis produces 2 pyruvates, 2 ATPs, and 2 NADH. The pyruvates are then catalyzed into acetyl-CoA, and this process creates 2 NADH. The acetyl-CoA enter the Krebs cycle, and the Krebs cycle produces about 6 NADH, 2 FADH2, and 2 ATPs through substrate-level phosphorylation. The electron carriers enter the electron transport chain and produce about 34 ATPs, the most amount through oxidative phosphorylation. A net gain of 30 ATPs is produced. CO2 and H2O are released as a waste from the various stages. Respiration can occur aerobic with oxygen or anaerobic without oxygen, like yeast, bacteria, and archaea. They don't live in oxygen-rich environments, so they must figure out another way to obtain energy. One way is alcoholic fermentation. In alcoholic fermentation, the same step, glycolysis, is used, because glycolysis can occur without oxygen. Glycolysis produces pyruvate, but then this pyruvate doesn't enter Krebs cycle, but instead is turned into ethanol. 2 ATP is produced by glycolysis and 2 NADH is produced, but gets recycled back into NAD+. CO2 is released as waste. Another way is lactic acid fermentation. This uses the same step, glycolysis. But once it produces the pyruvate, this produces lactate. 2 ATP is produced, 2 NADH is produced, but gets reduced into NAD+. No CO2 is released. Organisms that use alcohol fermentation include yeast and bacteria. And organisms that use lactic acid is human muscle cells. This form of respiration doesn't produce enough energy as cellular respiration. Energy is a crucial component of our life and drives many metabolic processes. Without this, we wouldn't be alive. Many of our daily activities depends on cellular respiration and photosynthesis. Thank you for watching. Hope this video helped you. See you next time.